what's on trend now for 2024? Specifically for dyes and washes. What are you seeing out there?
I'm seeing, well, the freedom to use any color is huge, right?
Yep.
People are being definitely more adventurous with ordering interesting lavenders and off-whites and peaches and neon colors. So that's been really fun for us to see. But in terms of like specialty washes and what a lot of the creatives are asking me for right now is something that looks vintage, right? And that can be achieved in so many ways. But what specifically people are honing in on is this thing called potassium spray.
We live below the fold. We live underneath those incredible brands.
What is the vision? Right? So like there's a story, but then it's like, where are you trying to go? If it's compelling enough, then you start to get people to believe in it.
All right, this next guest is a good friend of the pod, our dear friend Daniel from BTSA. Welcome back, my friend. How you doing?
What's up, guys? Glad to be back. Thanks for having me back.
The homie.
Doing good.
So this next topic that came up, there's so much uncertainty when it comes to the dye and wash process. We're constantly not only in client meetings, but with team meetings, and there's so many different options. And then after that, you go into all the different types of garments that could be used with these different options and treatments. And so I said, you know what? Hold on one second. We're going to call in the pros. Let me get my homie Daniel on, and we're going to talk dyes and washes. We're going to talk all the different types of options that we have. But maybe you could just start with the basics, like run us through the difference between piece dyeing and garment dyeing, and then hit on like reactive pigment and probably know the terminology even better from there. Give us just like the rundown. We're going to go dyes and washes 101 today.
Yeah, I mean, if you guys want to start from the top, right? You said it, you said piece dye and garment dye. Those are like kind of the beginning steps of how a garment is produced. So when someone's telling you, hey, I'm going to this garment or this blank is garment dye, that means that hoodie, t-shirt, whatever it is, was cut and sewn in a fabric that hasn't been dyed yet. And then once it's a finished sewn up garment, it goes to get dyed as a garment, right? Typically in those cases, if the manufacturer is doing it right, they will calculate how much that fabric is going to shrink. So once it goes through that garment dye process, it's going to be a proper spec and consistent as someone would need it to sell for their business, right? Majority of what the blanks you guys see out there is either a piece dye or a yarn dye, essentially meaning the fabric comes that color before you cut it and sew it into a garment, right? So piece dyeing is something that we do here domestically, where we take a PFD, which is prepared for dye fabric, and then we dye the rolls, essentially laundering the fabric before cutting and sewing. Now, like a lot of the big boys, they'll do a yarn dye or what have you, which means, the core of the cotton yarn is going to be a certain color before it even gets knitted down into a fabric, right? So typically you see that with poly blends and all the mass market stuff out there, because you can't. Dyeing polyester with cotton is also another tricky business that we can get into if we want to, right? So that's kind of like the basics there. Garment dye and piece dye, just the fundamentals of how the garment's being constructed, is two different paths. Now, when we go into garment dye, then you have the ability to take that finished garment without dye and do cool stuff with it, right? So majority of the time when you're dealing with a cotton garment, the best form of dyeing a 100% cotton blank is something called a reactive dye. Reactive dye process is supposed to be the most common in the cotton world. And what it really is it's in the name, it's a reactive dye. So there's a dye that comes in, and then there's a binding agent that reacts with the dye, and then it really locks into that fabric, right, to the cotton. That's what we use here at BTSA, and that's kind of where you're supposed to go with 100% cotton. But alternative to that, for novelty dyes, for specialty washes, for tie dyes, you can't always be putting it in a vat and binding it because, you know, it's spot treatments or it's a hand tie dye, or it needs to get discharged, which is a form of bleaching the dye out. And for those specialty cases or more fun cases, there's a process called direct dye, which is less binding to the cotton, but will allow someone to do some more interesting things because it doesn't take as much work to, you know, dye the garment, right? You just kind of have to put it on and let it sit and make sure it soaks in and, you know, wash it out or whatever after, right? Now, there's so many different kinds of dyes, so we're just going to touch on some of the big ones that a lot of people like to use, right? So you mentioned pigment dye as well. Pigment dye is another form of taking a garment and dyeing it with a different chemical called pigment dye. And the nature of pigment dye, it gives you this beautiful washed out vintage look out of the dryer, right? And it does that because the dye doesn't fully absorb into the garment. It kind of sits on top of the cotton, right? So the dye is made to be stripped and for the color to lose its kind of saturation.
Yep.
Yeah. So that you get these interesting highs and lows of hues of white with the deeper parts of the yarn being a little bit darker and all that stuff, right? So there are a lot of misconceptions on the pigment dye process because you guys are decorators and you guys know sometimes it might be difficult to work with pigment dye on print.
Oh,
And
yeah.
that's because the nature of a true pigment dye is to sit on top and it's always going to bleed. It's always going to kind of migrate because that's what the dye was made to do. So a lot of times, you know, some big boxes, they'll try to mimic a pigment dye by using less binding dyes and giving it extra washes to make it feel that way. But it's not going to be true pigment dye because they want it to be printable for the masses, right? So, but then pigment dye became a trend with streetwear brands and fashion brands. So that term became more of a term for how the garment will look as opposed to what the actual dye process is. So these are all these things that, you know, all of us use for marketing words to try to, you know, explain to our customers who are not as knowledgeable. Hey, you want something vintage washed out, you know, we're going to go pigment dye or we're going to go mineral wash, which is a whole different thing too, right? And there's little differences in how the finished garments looked. So, I mean, it'd be a great time to cue some little snippets of pigment dye and
Michelle's going to cue them all up for you.
Pop those in.
yeah.
Backing up a little bit, what are the biggest advantages of both sides? You know, why would you go piece dye? You know, why would you go ahead and dye the fabric first and then sew it? And then why would you want to go the garment dye, which is, you know, the item, the product is already sewn together, and then we're going to go dye it? What are the two advantages, and like, how do they sit?
The advantages of going piece dye is cost is an advantage, but cost versus volume is very important, right? When you're going piece dye, you have to commit yourself to using a bulk amount of fabric in one color, right? Usually when you're ordering bulk, let's say 1,000 t-shirts, right? And you know they're all just going to be one color. It is advantageous to get a pigment dye because you probably will get a better pricing getting the fabric dyed first because you don't need to put in any extra labor on doing multiple rounds of shrinkage tests, sending garments out to the dye vendor, having them come back from the dye vendor, and then QCing it as well. Because if someone's doing a proper supply chain, and if it's a premium garment, you know, they're checking if it's being made well every step of the way. Essentially, with the piece dye process, you get the fabric, you sew it, you check the sewing once, it's good, then you're good. With the garment dye route, it's a little bit more difficult because we have to get the fabric, then we need to test how the fabric is going to shrink. Then we need to alter the pattern and make the garments. Then we need to check if those garments that are being made are, like, the sewing is good and everything's good on those. Then we send them out to dye. There's labor involved, pulling the inventory, sending it out to dye, checking in with the dye houses to make sure the color is consistent, then bringing it back here to where we ultimately check the quantity of the garments one more time to see if there's anything that happened to a small percentage of garments that we can't sell, pulling out any minor imperfections, because the garment dye process it's a little rigorous. You know, we're throwing a couple hundred garments in this big tank and they kind of swirl around there, they bang around each other, and one might get snagged or one might, you know, not dye as well. And we do a really good job, and most of the dye houses in the US do an amazing job, but with any manufacturing, there's a small percentage of fallout, right? So if someone's doing it properly, there's all these labor steps that are involved with garment dye that aren't necessarily needed with the piece dye, but ultimately the benefits of all this is with that garment dye product, you're getting something that's fully pre-shrunk. So when your customer or yourself is washing that at home, it's not going to shrink in the dryer. You can throw it in there on high heat and it's good to go, right? And then we have the ability for emerging brands, for growing creatives to be able to make, let's say, 300 PFD non-dyed garments. Then they have the ability to take those 300 units and dye them in 6 different colors. So they're not constrained to high MOQs if they want a specialty color, right? So, you know, if we're speaking to a young brand, there's limitations to what kind of blanks there are in the market. You know, it's whatever you find on Essence, Activewear, Sanmar, the colors, that they're all set and you have to, you know, work within those parameters. But if you have a garment dye blank, then any Pantone cone available to you is pretty much what you can make to be your garment, right? And we have to make the garments a little bit more sturdy for the garment dye process because it does need to go through that commercial dye process, which is much more rigorous than a home washing machine.
Yeah. First thing that comes to mind is, boy, I'm glad Daniel has to deal with all this and not us, because there's so much that goes into it. But since this is a dye and wash 101, talking about a PDF, not a PDF. A lot of people call it like a document, a PFD. Can you explain that, like a prepared for dye? I know a lot of people get those two terms kind of mixed up sometimes. What is that? And then kind of just define that, since there's a lot of people that just may not even know what that is from the start. And then I want to talk about the shrinkage that you talked about, because like if you're taking a garment that's ready to be dyed, what do you have to take in consideration on sizing and scaling when you do that?
Oh man, you're asking me for my secrets, man. But I'll definitely share what I can with you guys. You know?
Well, from the customer side, I guess, is like being prepared, knowing you have to come down one, right?
Yeah. I mean, we do this every day here at BTSA. We have to explain to everybody what the process is, you know, so definitely not familiar. It's familiar for me. PFD, it just means prepared for dye, right? So a PFD garment is that cotton yarn that hasn't been dyed yet, but it's been bleached and it's been rinsed and it's been cleaned for its imperfections, and it's been ready to be used as a garment that can be dyed later, right? So typically it'll come as a natural color, like an off-white, ecru, just cotton color, because it has gone through a bleaching process to give it a really clean start for when you do dye it. Then there's no other colors or chemicals in there, trying to like mix in with the dye to alter what that shade's going to look like once you're done dyeing that garment, right? So it's really comes down to how the fabric is made. PFD as a garment is a garment made with PFD fabric, and as a fabric, it's a fabric that has not been dyed yet, but it's been treated to get ready for dye.
Mm-hmm. And as far as, I mean, every time you're on, you bring us so much value. I know every time somebody has a question from your past episodes, we're like, watch the video. Here you go. Watch the video, watch the video. So thank you for that. But we also look to you a lot on like, tell us what's next. What are you seeing now? Damn, we're already a new year here and already past Q1 already, which is insane. Mm-hmm. What's on trend now for 2024? Specifically for dyes and washes, what are you seeing out there?
I'm seeing, well, the freedom to use any color is huge, right? So color stories are becoming a little bit more interesting. Yep. People are being definitely more adventurous with ordering interesting lavenders and off-whites and peaches and neon colors. So that's been really fun for us to see, just the evolution of how many different colors people are really trying to dye with us. But in terms of like specialty washes and what a lot of the creatives are asking me for right now is something that looks vintage, right? And that can be achieved in so many ways. But what specifically people are honing in on is this thing called a potassium spray. Yep. Essentially, it's a garment that looks like it's been naturally sun faded, and a designer or whoever can choose how that fade looks, right? So if a designer has, a t-shirt or a hoodie, like a vintage one that's from, like the 70s or 80s, and it's been worn a million times and it's seen the sunlight and it's got all these cool fades coming down, we can essentially mimic that with using this potassium on top of a garment that's sprayed on by an airbrush piece by piece.
Yeah, we're gonna have to layer that in a little bit, Michelle. Maybe we could get a little footage of that. I know we have an incredible potassium that you send to us as a sample, so we're gonna layer that in here. Okay, all right, give us another one.
Distressing is kind of coming back too. So okay. With us, we have to do some distressing for people where that's the beauty of garment dye as well, right? So we can distress a garment before it's dyed using, sandpaper, nicking and grinding, scissors, whatever method we're trying to achieve, right? Then we make those little holes and those grinds into the garment. Then we send it out to get garment dyed, and it goes through 1 to 2 wash process. And then after it comes out, then that distressing looks real. It looks like it's gone through some batter. It looks like it's naturally been done that way. That on top of a pigment dye to a potassium spray, you get a really interesting garment that like a lot of fashion brands are trying to achieve, compared to like some of the highest end Japanese brands that are doing that with their denim and their fleece as well, right? So those are really cool dye techniques. Other than that, we're seeing a push for natural dyes, with sustainability always being like a topic of conversation, especially in our sector of business. The barrier of entry to do natural dyes is very, it's difficult, it's expensive, because for people to extract these natural dyes, it takes a lot of work, and there's a lot of fake news out there too. So you have to really double check and make sure if someone's saying that this is a natural dye, look into like, what are they using for the color? Is it extracted from natural fibers and turned into a dye, or is it really a natural dye? Because that's where it gets a little cloudy. But if you can find the right partner for something like that, it's really cool what you can achieve and how sustainable you can really go with these garments.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. We're always looking to you for the trends. We stay hip through you, Daniel.
Not at all. Not at all.
Last thing I was going to touch on was sampling. So do you encourage sampling first and making sure you're getting the right colors? And I know we do that a lot on our end, is making sure that we're sampling and getting the pieces in front of management or, you know, whoever's making the decisions. Is that a hard process for you guys to sample? Is that something you encourage?
You know, it is something that we encourage, but again, you know, I don't want anybody to be spending over their means either, right? So everyone's got to be aware, if you know, if you're trying to dabble into some of these specialty dyes and trying to test out some creative solutions or some stuff that no one's ever done before, you know, you got to be ready to put some dollars behind that development, right? Because oftentimes, if it's never been done before, and we're we're working together on trying to achieve something that's not been done before, you know, it's a trial and error thing, you know, and there's time and energy spent on that. And it's not hard. It's just, hey, do you have the budget for it? And do you have the calendar set? So you have, you know, a couple weeks to test out different dyes, spend a couple $100 to test out different dyes, to see what you like best, and then move forward from there. But yeah, sampling is always encouraged, and we have, you know, a whole system set up in place for that, and most dye houses do as well. Most dye houses have, you know, sample tanks and then production tanks where they're testing things out before they're doing, you know, 10,000 units of something, because, you know, especially in our trade, you know, we always got to be double checking. We always have to be making sure that everything's going to look good first before we make, you know, a million of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, nobody wants to open up the box and say, "Oh, here's 10,000 units that is the wrong shade or the wrong color." We love that you're always so open to work with us on samples, come up with new ideas, and you know, sometimes things that have never been done, there's a really darn good reason why it's never been done, and you know, that sample process kind of shows that quickly. Yeah, anything else that you want to add as far as like, you know, things that we may have missed? I know we got some incredible information, and Michelle's going to layer on top all different visuals and stuff. But anything else?
I mean, the main thing is, with all garment dye and dye tests, you know, when we're dealing with natural fibers, it's temperamental, you know, like as much data as we can collect on a cotton yarn, you know, it's grown from soil, right? So we can't always control exactly how it's gonna react to everything, but you know, we have a pretty good idea. And with that, you know, we always suggest everybody that uses a garment that blank to print on, to test the print. Test the print to make sure that the print agrees with whatever dye process that you're using. You know, I mentioned it with the pigment dye process. There is a dye migration that happens. You guys know about it. I know about it, but you know, somebody who's testing it out for the first time might not know. There's no disclaimers out there, you know? So always make sure, if you're ordering specialty dye in bulk, to test one unit and let it sit for a day, because that ink might take 12 to 24 hours to react to the dye, right? It's a really important thing that most people don't do. And if you're trying to put out a quality product, take the time to make sure that you believe it's a quality product by doing these extra steps to double check that this is the right process and it's not going to change and it's consistent.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. You know, we already did some really awesome episodes before. If you want to look back onto our feed, Daniel's on there with us. We're talking about the whole concept of the pigment migration and so forth, because yeah, as decorators, sometimes the ink can, you know, like somehow, some way get the dye that migrates into it, and it changes slight color, and we kind of run through that. So if you're interested in that topic, please go ahead, look back. Maybe Michelle, you can actually post that link below. But Daniel, thank you so much for being on with us. Once again, you're the best. Every time we need a pro, we always look to you.
Thank you, guys.
The garment is incredible as well. We're going to put links and all that stuff where you can go find that on our catalog. But if you like what we have here, or if you like what Daniel had to say, please make a comment, subscribe to one of our channels, and we'll bring you back on again. Thank you so much, my friend.
Thank you, gentlemen. Always a pleasure talking to you guys.